Welcome to Ask Dr. Change. I'm Dr. Linda Ackerman Anderson. I'm happy to have you join me today to explore how to seriously uplevel your leadership and consulting to transformational changes, all through conscious change leadership. Welcome. Today's episode is about a really important strategic navigation of major change efforts. How to launch your change efforts for success. Launching is one of the most critical, complex phases of change. It's the upstream change versus midstream design, downstream implementation. This is how to set up your change efforts for success from the very beginning. That's launch. I have worked with a number of organizations to support them to learn how to launch effectively. What I'm going to go over with you today. I had one client who said, I want to create a launch factory for every one of our change efforts. They'd go so much more smoothly, so much more efficiently if we did this. I didn't like the idea of a factory, but the concept was there. It's like every change effort needs to undergo launch in a much more effective way. Ongoing consulting inevitably has issues because of poor launch. And so the upstream stage, prior to assessment, prior to design, prior to implementation planning, involves launch. I want to go over the 7 critical requirements of launch with you today. And what they do is help to resolve some of the common issues that we typically feel and see when projects are not well launched. So, absentee sponsor. Confusion about outcomes, unclear roles in decision-making, unsure what the scope is, unsure what we're actually trying to do here and who's doing what, unclear about the process we're going to use. All of these things are indicators of an absence of good quality, conscious launch to the project. So I'm going to go over 7 requirements with you today and talk about each one. I invite you to consider how much of each of these 7 requirements you currently do, your organizations do, your clients do, and what the implications are of if they were able to take on this work at the beginning. Launch is the beginning. And who would do this? So it's not always the sponsor, it's not always the project leader, it's not always the project team. It might not always be your consultants, but it might be any of them to do this work. So we'll look a little bit about that as we go into each one. The first requirement is clarifying desired outcomes. What's your vision for the project? Who creates the outcomes, the vision? And is it compelling to your organization, to your stakeholders? If it's just a number, it tends to translate into being threatening. If it's about creating a new reality that's got great positive benefit for the business, for its future, then it's more compelling. And so how do you actually create outcomes and make them relevant to your stakeholders? That's another piece, by the way, making outcomes relevant when you communicate. And so part of launch is communicating, we're making this change effort. Here's what we're going to accomplish. Here's how big it is. We'll talk a little bit about scope. What's important here is that it's in language that your stakeholders who have to undergo the change are actually seeing, I get it. I understand. I see why we need to do this. And I can see that I can contribute to it. That's a really important part of your launch communications. So relevant, meaningful, compelling, desired outcomes, and your vision for the future state. One of the ways in which we organize our work is what we call a 4-quadrant approach. That has everything to do with desired outcomes. The 4 quadrants are mindset. What outcomes do you want in mindset? Behavior. What do people need to be doing differently to achieve your outcome? Culture. How do we realign the culture to support sustaining the future state we're after? And of course, your content solution, be that structure, business process, ways of relating to your customer, IT, anything that defines your solution. All of those belong, all 4 quadrants belong in desired outcomes, and they need to be made relevant and meaningful to your stakeholders. The next requirement is leadership alignment. Are your leaders aligned behind doing the change, what they want it to accomplish for the business, and most importantly, what's going to be asked of them? So they may provide people, they may provide resources, budget, support, participation, engagement, communications. Are your leaders, beyond the sponsor, are your executives and leaders of the change effort aligned behind the process required to accomplish the transformation? Frequently, you'll get the head nod about the outcome you want because everyone says, that's great, go do it. How about alignment to the process, which may in fact require their engagement, their resources, their people, their capacity? They need to be aligned to be able to contribute what's required of them as part of the leadership team overseeing the transformation. The next requirement is good governance. Lord, how this shows up over and over and over again. So who's in charge of what? So it's not just the sponsor and the project leader, but who's on your project team? And what authorities does everybody have? Decision-making. And how are you going to structure all your resources? Are you going to have work streams of various projects underneath them? How are you organizing all of the initiatives, all of the work required to get the change off and running? Good governance is role clarity, decision-making, good structure, and also how are you going to interface all of these people doing change work with the ongoing running of the operation? Interfaces. And so good governance is essential. In a current client that I have, it is so clear to them that they're not clear. they fight with each other. They compete with each other. They make decisions and go back on them. The wrong people are making decisions. They stand in the way. Governance is a mess. And so how do you actually clarify roles, structure, decision-making, authorities, accountability, and interface with the operation? Really important to launch. And the sooner you do it right out of the gate with change strategy, which I'll talk about momentarily, the better off your change efforts will be. It takes some investment of time. It takes some knowledge to understand the factors of governance. Again, roles, structure, decision-making, and interface with operations in order to achieve a clear charter and a clear ability of how we're going to function. The next requirement is case for change. Why are we doing this? What is the need? What's the opportunity? What's the threat? And how big is this change effort? This too requires clarity for a team to understand why they're doing it. It's also clarity for why we're coming up with the desired outcomes that we're coming up with, because we have this need or we have this opportunity. And I like to focus on the opportunity piece because it's more compelling. And so case for change is different than your business case, which is typically the numbers, what the return on investment will be by making this change. Important, essential, and different than the case. The case is, why should I do this? Why is the organization doing this? How big is this thing? Why is this so important to our future? Case for change is important. It's a part of the compelling story that leaders will communicate at the beginning of a change effort, what we hope to accomplish and why we need it. And then ultimately, how big is this thing? What's in and what's out? All of that is a part of case for change. It's also essential to determine the type of change this project is. People need to understand the distinctions between it's strictly development, we just have to get better, or it's transitional, we can't keep doing the old thing, we're going to put in place this particular new thing, so we're undoing and redoing, or transformational, which is huge and profound, and we need to figure it out as we go, both how we operate, who we are, how we are with each other, what we're modeling, what our culture is. All of that is embedded in transformational change. So what type of change are we leading alters the process we actually will be using. That leads me to the next responsibility, which is, are your leaders skilled, knowledgeable, confident in how to lead the magnitude of this change effort? Do you have competent change leadership capability? That's really important. What process will you use? Project management has a process, change management has a process, Lean Six Sigma has a process, Agile has a process. What process will you use that aligns all of that work and enables you to launch effectively and see your project all the way through to sustain business benefits? So leadership capability. In addition, do you have the capacity? Are people able to take the time, give their attention, give their resources to be able to take on the change work in addition to their normal operating work? Do you have the capacity? I will share with you the capacity question is the number one issue for all the research that we've done over decades and decades of doing this work. Capacity for change is the number one issue. So how do you make capacity? How do you ensure capacity? How do you pace the change so that capacity is adequate? All of this is important. In addition, have you set the expectations for what the change process, the experience of undergoing this change is going to mean? Have you set the expectation? There's going to be a lack of clarity at times. There's going to be backpedaling sometimes. There may be course corrections sometimes. There's a lot being asked of people. There may be training to go to. What expectations are you setting with the organization and your stakeholders? Next up is a huge piece, a huge deliverable of launch is your change strategy. This is different than your change plan, your project plan. It's a different entity. Your project plan is the tactical plan. Who's going to do what over what period of time? The change strategy is strategic navigation of governance, which I mentioned, of the scope, which I also mentioned, what's in, what's out, how we're going to integrate across initiatives, how we're going to engage, how we're going to communicate. It's not the detailed planning of all these things, but it's strategically positioning. We are going to engage our stakeholders from the beginning, as an example, and setting those expectations for how the project plan then is generated. It's also an estimate of milestone events over a period of time and a best guess of budget. All of these things are important in your change strategy. All of them help to clarify and align all the dynamic factors that are at play when launching a major transformational effort. And the last major piece I want to talk about is conditions for success. This is a critical one. It's simple to think through. It's really important to set in place to actually establish. What are conditions for success? They're factors, they're conditions, they're enablers, they're gas pedals for setting the project up for success. Really essential to define during launch. So how much budget do we need? How much openness will we have? How much engagement will we do? What access to leaders will we have? Conditions for success can be both for the organization, like timing and budget, but also for leaders, how open they are to people telling the truth, to making course corrections, to engaging, to modeling. All of these might be conditions for success. If you set up conditions for success from the very beginning, you're demonstrating to the organization, this isn't just flavor of the month. We are actually creating, establishing, and monitoring how well this is going to go and setting the expectation that it go well because we've thought through the things, the factors, the conditions needed for it to go well. So 7 major elements to help launch: desired outcomes, leadership alignment, good governance, case for change leadership capability, capacity and expectations, change strategy, and conditions for success. I'm hoping you can imagine doing this work with your clients, with your project teams, with your sponsors, in order to effectively launch the change efforts you support. Now, my pro tip for you today is to get involved from the very beginning. So often the consultants that we work with are invited in when it's design time or implementation time, way late. Setting expectations for launch, for a solid launch, happens at the very beginning. So get involved from the very beginning. You may need to renegotiate your role, the ways in which you're working with the project leaders, the sponsor, or the teams, so that you can actually influence getting launch to occur early in the process. Clearly, any of these requirements need to be tailored. And so if the magnitude of the change effort is small, they're tailored down. If it's large and complex, they're tailored up. So do the tailoring of each of these. Learn about them so that you know the work required in doing each of them, and then be able to tailor them to the magnitude of the change effort you're responsible for. The other thing I want to say as part of a pro tip is take a stand for a solid, clear launch. This is not make work. This is not excess. This is establishing the foundation of success for the entire change effort. You wouldn't think about building a building from the first floor up. You need a foundation. And so launch is a solid foundation. Now, my personal reflection for you is currently, how do you observe projects being launched today? And what would you see that's working? What would you see that's missing? And how could you translate into your own language the value and power of each of these 7 requirements? Maybe it's 1 or 2 or 3 of them. Maybe it's all 7. How do you relate to the effectiveness and the value of offering the service of a solid launch? That's what's absolutely critical here. How can you make this work a part of the set of services, the repertoire of what you offer your clients, or you as a leader, how you actually sponsor and set up the projects that you're initiating in the organization? So I hope you'll take on that personal reflection, take on these 7 requirements, and please launch your projects with greater clarity and confidence than ever before. I hope you've received some value from today, and I hope you will take on effective launch of your projects. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Thanks for spending some time with me today. I hope you gained some valuable insights for your work. Please send me your questions and challenges by going to askdrchange.com.